When my phone finally lit up, it wasn't joy that washed over me. It was disappointment, heavy and sharp, the kind that sinks deep into your chest. My son Daniel had remembered my birthday 3 days late, and not in the way a son should. His message was short, careless, and ended with a remark that I should have reminded him. Imagine that. After carrying him for 9 months, after decades of being the one who remembered every detail of his life, I was now expected to manage even his memory of mine. I stared at that message far longer than I should have. My heart wanted to forgive him, to brush it off like I had so many times before. But something inside me shifted that night. It wasn't just about a forgotten birthday. It was about years of giving without gratitude, years of being needed only for what I could provide. You see, Daniel and his wife Caroline live beautifully, too beautifully. Their house gleams in the suburbs, their children attend the best schools, and Caroline never seems to worry about the cost of her shopping sprees. None of it would have been possible without me. My late husband left us comfortable, and I kept that comfort flowing. Mortgage payments, tuition, endless extras, it all came from my checkbook, disguised as love. And yet, when the one day came that should have mattered to them, I sat alone in my quiet apartment with nothing but silence and a stale chocolate cake I had baked with arthritic hands. That cake sat untouched for days, just like my heart overlooked, forgotten, discarded. That moment, staring at my son's message, I knew something was deeply wrong. And if I'm being honest, it hadn't started there. The signs had been building, slowly, quietly, over months. I just hadn't wanted to face them. But now, I couldn't ignore it any longer. And so, let me take you back to when the cracks first began to show. A few months before that late birthday message, my life had already started to feel like a quiet erosion of love. I had slipped into a role I never meant to play, the role of the family bank. Every month, without fail, money left my account and flowed into Daniel and Caroline's. Their mortgage, their children's private school, even the new furniture and renovations, they were all paid for by me. It was presented as love, as support, but really it had become expectation. I was the safety net they no longer even noticed was there. The signs were subtle at first. Daniel's calls grew shorter, less frequent, and almost always ended with some request for help. Caroline would sit across from me at Sunday dinners, scrolling through her phone or chatting about her endless projects, barely acknowledging me. Even the grandchildren, sweet as they were, seemed to treat my presence as another box to check. Visits felt rehearsed, shallow. I tried to brush it off, telling myself family goes through phases, that loyalty and gratitude would show themselves in time. But the moments of neglect stacked up like bricks, one on top of the other, until the wall between us was impossible to ignore. The breaking point came with something as simple as a cake. I had gone out the day before Daniel's birthday, carefully picking up the ingredients for his favorite chocolate, the same recipe I'd made since he was a boy. My hands ached as I mixed and stirred, but I told myself the effort was worth it. Love, after all, is shown in these small acts. That morning, I set the cake out, waiting for him to arrive. I waited through the afternoon, glancing at the window every time a car passed. Evening came, then night, and still nothing. The cake sat untouched, its sweetness slowly turning stale. For 3 days, it sat there, a silent reminder of where I stood in his world. On the 4th day, I scraped it into the trash, fighting back tears. That was the moment I realized something inside me had begun to harden. My love had been taken for granted too long, and deep down, I knew a change was coming, whether Daniel was ready for it or not. The moment I read Daniel's careless birthday message, something inside me snapped. For years, I had convinced myself that sacrifice was love, that giving endlessly meant I was doing my duty as a mother. But that night, sitting in the quiet of my apartment, I realized I had been little more than a bank account dressed up as family. My love had become invisible, replaced by transactions. And so, with a calm I didn't expect, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. My voice was steadier than it had been in years. I asked him to shut everything down: the transfers that kept Daniel and Caroline's mortgage afloat, the payments that covered the cars, the credit cards, even the children's tuition. Within 24 hours, the river of money that had been flowing into their lives for years dried up completely. And for the first time in decades, I felt like I was holding the reins of my own life. At first, there was silence. Then came the storm. My phone lit up with call after call, Daniel's name flashing again and again. By midnight, he had rung me 47 times. Caroline followed with her own attempts, her voice sharp and desperate on voicemail. Each message grew more frantic. At first, confusion: something must be wrong with the bank. Then worry bills were bouncing. Finally, raw panic: pleading, bargaining, even trying to guilt me back into compliance. I sat back in my chair, a glass of wine in hand, and listened to it all. Their desperation was loud, but for once, I chose silence. It was almost amusing to hear urgency in their voices when, for years, my needs had been met with indifference. While their world unraveled, I discovered something I hadn't felt in so long: peace. Of course, I knew this was only the beginning. People like Daniel and Caroline don't give up easily. When money is at stake, they find new strategies, new performances, and deep down, I could already sense it: the next act in their play was about to begin. It didn't take long for the tone to change. After the flurry of desperate calls that went unanswered, the next phase began. Suddenly, Daniel's voice was sweet as honey every time the phone rang. He spoke as though he had just realized I was alive, asking about my health, my meals, whether I'd been sleeping well. Part of me wanted to lean into it, to believe he had remembered what it meant to care. But I knew better. Those weren't questions from the heart. They were lines from a script, rehearsed and delivered because money was on the line. Then came the flowers. An extravagant bouquet of white roses appeared at my door, the kind I had never once received on a birthday or Mother's Day. The card was signed from both Daniel and Caroline, dripping with sentiment. My apartment smelled of lilies for days, but all I could think was how strange it felt to be celebrated only when the checks had stopped. The children were next. My granddaughter, Emily, called one afternoon. At first, I felt a spark of hope. I couldn't remember the last time she had picked up the phone just to talk to me. But her voice was stiff, her words too polished, as if she were reading them from a page. She told me all about her school and how much she loved me. And as she spoke, my heart sank. I could hear the strain in her tone, the fear of saying the wrong thing. Later, my grandson sent me a letter, written in unusually neat handwriting, telling me I was the best grandmother in the world. The words were sweet, but they weren't his. They belonged to someone else's agenda. That was what stung the most, not their fake affection, but the way they dragged the children into it. My own grandchildren were being used like pawns in a game I had never agreed to play. I told myself I wouldn't let anger take over, but it was hard not to feel betrayed on a deeper level. The attention should have comforted me, but instead, it left a bitter taste. Love that only appears when the money disappears is not love at all. And as I watched the layers of this performance unfold, I couldn't shake the feeling that behind all of it, something even more troubling was being set in motion. For days, I tried to convince myself that maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe the sudden warmth from Daniel and Caroline was real. Maybe the flowers and phone calls and the children's letters had come from a place of love after all. My heart wanted to believe it, but a quiet unease followed me everywhere, whispering that something was off. That unease turned into truth one afternoon when I stopped by their house unannounced. The kids had left a tablet open on the kitchen counter. I meant only to move it aside, but the screen glowed with an email that caught my eye. It was between Daniel and Caroline, a back and forth about how to get Mom to loosen her grip. My stomach tightened as I scrolled. There it was. In black and white, they weren't trying to rebuild a relationship, they were planning to pressure me into signing over part of my estate. They wrote about using the children more, how Grandma won't be able to resist if the kids keep asking. Caroline even listed tactics, like hosting family dinners to make me feel included, or pushing me to meet with their financial advisor. My hands trembled as I read. Every bouquet, every carefully coached phone call, every forced letter, it hadn't been affection. It was strategy. I remember standing there, hearing the sound of my granddaughter's laughter upstairs, and my heart cracked open. Those little voices I cherished had been turned into tools. They didn't know it. Of course, they were innocent. But the thought of my love for them being used as bait left me breathless, as though someone had knocked the air right out of me. I closed the tablet gently, but inside, something hard and sharp took root. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was betrayal in its purest form. And with it came a clarity I hadn't felt in years. They hadn't fooled me. They couldn't anymore. Walking out of that house, I knew the truth. Daniel and Caroline didn't want reconciliation. They wanted control. They wanted security. They wanted what wasn't theirs to take. And if I stayed silent, they would keep using love as a weapon until there was nothing left of me. That day, grief gave way to resolve. My heart was broken. Yes, but it was also steady. I had faced the truth, and now I was ready to face them. The time for pretending was over. The weight of that discovery sat heavy in my chest for days, a cold, hard lump that refused to dissolve. But I knew I couldn't let it rot me from the inside out. I had spent far too many years of my life swallowing hurt and pretending it didn't matter, covering bitterness with a smile. This time was going to be different. This time, I needed to look them in the eyes and speak the unvarnished truth, no matter how ugly it was. So I picked up the phone and asked Daniel and Caroline to come to my apartment, to meet with me alone. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt a strange and profound calmness settle over me, a quiet assurance, as if my very spirit knew this confrontation had been a long, long time coming. When they arrived, the air in my small living room immediately grew thick with an unspoken tension so palpable it felt like I could reach out and touch it. They tried desperately to act casual, plastering on forced, brittle smiles and offering shallow pleasantries about the weather. But I could see the nervous energy flickering underneath their composed facades, in the way Daniel couldn't keep his hands still, and how Caroline's eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine. For once in my life, I didn't rush to ease their discomfort. I let the silence stretch, letting it grow heavy and uncomfortable, forcing them to feel the full weight of what was about to come. Inside, my own hands trembled slightly in my lap, but not from fear or weakness. This was the tremor of decades of repressed anger and unspoken resentment finally rising to the surface, demanding to be heard. I let them sit for another moment before I spoke. "I know everything," I said, my voice steadier and colder than I had ever heard it. I watched as their faces shifted in an instant. Caroline's feigned warmth curdled into a mask of pure panic, and Daniel's fragile bravado crumbled into a look of raw, cornered shame. I told them about the emails, the sickeningly detailed plan to secure control of my estate, the calculated way they had scripted and staged even their own children's affection. They tried to deny it at first. Of course. Their words tumbled out in a clumsy, unconvincing mess, fumbling with half-formed excuses and blatant lies, blaming their actions on stress, on the pressure of bills, on simple misunderstandings. "You took it the wrong way." "Mom," Daniel stammered, while Caroline insisted it was just a hypothetical conversation. I had heard every excuse in the book over my lifetime, and I wasn't about to let them bury me under another avalanche of them. For the first time in decades, my voice was steady, firm, and completely unshakable. I told them that I was not their bank, nor was I a wallet with a pulse, an endless resource to be drained at their convenience. I was their mother, a woman who had loved them with every fiber of her being, and they had betrayed that love in the most cruel and calculated way imaginable. Caroline's tears came quickly then, a sudden and dramatic display, though I knew with a chilling certainty that they were not for me or for the pain she had caused. They were tears for the comfortable lifestyle and the financial security she now saw slipping from her grasp. Daniel just looked at me with something close to desperation, a child's plea in his eyes, but I searched his face and found no true remorse there, only the stark, selfish fear of losing what he had always believed was owed to him. It hurt more than I could ever put into words to see my own child standing before me so hollow, so profoundly entitled, but at the same time, that pain freed me. Because in that single, clarifying moment, I finally and truly understood that nothing I ever said or gave would ever be enough for them. Their hunger was bottomless. I felt my anger burn bright, a purifying flame that consumed all the old hurt and doubt before it dimmed into something far more powerful and enduring resolve. I told them, in no uncertain terms, that this was the end of the arrangement, the end of the monthly checks, the end of me being held hostage by their endless needs and their heartless manipulations. I would no longer finance their lives, and more importantly, I would no longer tolerate being treated as a means to an end, as something less than human. When I finally stood up, signaling the conversation was over, they followed me with frantic, pleading eyes, but I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy, invisible chains I had allowed them to fasten around my heart and my finances had finally, blessedly, fallen away. As I walked to the door and opened it for them, I wasn't just ushering them out of my house. I was stepping across a threshold into my own long overdue freedom. For the first time in as long as I could remember. I wasn't afraid of the silence or the solitude that would follow. In fact, I welcomed it. I was finally ready to live for myself, to reclaim what little time I had left on this earth with the dignity and peace I had denied myself for too long. And that's when it hit me with the force of a revelation. This wasn't the tragic end of my story. It was the powerful beginning of a new chapter. One where I, and I alone, finally decided what family, love, and respect truly meant. After they left, when the shouting and the tears were over, I found myself sitting alone in a house that suddenly felt lighter, larger, and full of air. For the first time in years, I wasn't anxiously waiting for a phone call that would come with a new list of needs, or bracing myself for the cold silence that always followed once the money cleared their account. I could just breathe. It was a strange sensation. At first, the quiet was so profound, it was almost deafening, but slowly, that quiet became comforting. I realized I had been living under a crushing weight for so long that I had completely forgotten what freedom even felt like. There is a deep and unshakable peace that comes when you finally decide, in your bones, that you are no longer willing to be used. For me, it was never just about the dollars and cents that steadily left my bank account each month. It was about the tiny pieces of myself I gave away every single time I said yes when my heart was screaming no. It was about the respect I sacrificed on the altar of a one-sided love. I know now that love should never feel like a transaction, and that respect should never be optional. It must be the foundation. Without genuine respect, the sweetest words turn bitter in your mouth. Without genuine care, even family can become strangers living under your own roof. I used to believe that being a good mother meant giving endlessly, sacrificing your own needs without a second thought, no matter the personal cost. But I've learned a hard lesson. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's a slow and painful form of self-erasure. Sacrifice without appreciation will hollow you out until nothing is left. It took me decades of heartache to finally understand that my worth was never tied to how much I could provide. My dignity was always mine to claim. And on that day, I finally chose to claim it. To anyone listening who has ever felt drained, overlooked, or taken for granted by the very people you love the most, you are not alone in your struggle. It is not selfish to step back and protect your own heart. It is not cruel to say that enough is finally enough. Sometimes, the bravest and most profound act of love is the one you finally give to yourself, the act of walking away from what hurts you and resolutely opening the door to your own peace. Now, my days are beautifully and blessedly simple. My mornings begin not with anxiety, but with a hot cup of coffee on my small porch, watching the world wake up. My evenings end not with a knot of dread in my stomach, but with a good book and the quiet hum of my own thoughts. I live for myself now, and in that simple, radical choice, I have found more joy and contentment than I ever did in a lifetime of trying to buy a love that was never truly there to begin with. If my story resonates with you in any way, I urge you to take a quiet moment to reflect on your own worth. Ask yourself if the love you receive is real and nurturing, or if it is merely a matter of convenience. And if this message has touched you, I invite you to share it, because there is surely someone else out there who needs to hear this reminder today that their peace is priceless and their dignity is worth protecting at all costs.